Whoops. I'm making videos still. Every Tuesday we release a libertarian video. We reach about average 2.3 million people, which isn't enough, and the ratings aren't the same as the Nielsen ratings were, because I can tell on the street when people used to come up all the time and say, you're what's his name, aren't you? I get less of that, but we are getting 2+ million hits, which is more than anybody else gets. But I need your help because I can't keep doing this. This week we did one on Javier, and God bless him. He seems still to have support. He's getting stuff passed despite some hostility, and it's finally something to be excited about among politics in the liberty movement. But look, I'm a crotchety old guy. I can't do this forever. We need help. So we have a job opening. I encourage you to apply. Rob Schementz, are you here? Would you stand up, please? He runs the charity, the classroom charity. He has the brochures he has a booth here, so if you want to see the job requirements, it is in New York City. Too bad that's where I am, and a lot of you refuse to go, but we could use Students for Liberty applicants. And I want to retire and have you take over. I started doing this 55 years ago. This was the hairstyle then. I was no libertarian. I was just a consumer reporter hired by a TV station, and they said, do this consumer reporting. And my attitude was like most people's. I mean, you have to acknowledge you people are abnormal. You get it. Almost nobody gets it. Our job is to help spread it, but it's not intuitive. And as a consumer reporter, I felt like most Americans, most people in the world do, say, okay, maybe capitalism is useful. It brings us some stuff. But by and large, it's cruel and unfair. And that's why we need government to regulate it and make it fair. And that was the kind of reporting I did, pointing out consumer scams. And my peers loved that. They awarded me 19 Emmy Awards. And I was, no, don't clap for Emmy Awards. They're bullshit. It's the liberal media praising itself. My feeling was what a lot of people have. You see a problem, you say, there ought to be a law. There needs to be regulation. The idea that competitive markets could solve it is just not intuitive. And that's what I was winning Emmys for. And as soon as I started to say this is a problem, I stopped winning Emmys. Once I became a libertarian, I no longer won anything from my peers. I don't know why they are so hostile to these ideas. It took me too long to understand the problems of the regulation. But I would do these consumer stories. We'd send a TV to a bunch of repair shops with a loose part. And 18 out of 20 places would say, oh, loose part, no charge. 2 would say, oh, we got to keep it over the weekend and charge us a couple $100. But we hidden cameraed the thing, so when we came back and accused them, they'd say, oh, I would never do that. And I could say, oh, yeah, watch this, and play the tape. And it was good television. And politicians would call up and say, oh, yeah, we saw that. We're going to fix this. We're going to create a Department of Consumer Affairs. And they did in Oregon, which is where I was at the time. And I felt so proud. These politicians were paying attention to young John Stossell. But I stayed on the beat, unlike most reporters who go on. And so I would do the same thing a year later, and same results. Most people were honest. A couple cheated us. So why didn't the department make a difference? Well, the department now, I went to see them. They were in a dreary government building, and they were licensing repair people. And that makes intuitive sense to people. We license dogs. We license drivers. Somehow we feel it makes us safer. But in this case, all it did was meant that everybody had to pay a little more, and we had to pay more for our TV repairs, to go through the process of licensing. And the immigrant who couldn't figure out the rules went underground. Or people had to hire lawyers to explain the rules to them. And it just slowed everything down. And I saw this again and again because I stayed on the beat and just was bewildered by it. And I started to try to read more, to understand. I read the conservative media, which seemed to want to go to war with everybody and police the bedroom. So that made no sense. I looked at more liberal media, and they wanted more regulation. I finally accidentally discovered Reason magazine, and this was my epiphany. Oh. They get it, and get it much better than I did, and I became a libertarian. So this changed my life. As I said, I stopped winning Emmy Awards, but I started reporting on trying to find ways to explain how the regulation itself was a problem. I tried to open a lemonade stand in Manhattan. I couldn't do it legally in under 10 months. And I mean, the stuff you had to do, you had to take a 15-hour food protection course. You had to take an exam, and you had to wait weeks just to take the exam, and so on. And then you could finally be legal if you bought the government-approved fire extinguisher. But this is crazy, and yet people still say, there ought to be a law. Got to do something about it. And then I saw that all these regulations, they didn't even have an effect on the obvious crooks. The people selling the penis enlargers and the breast enlargers and the burn fat while you sleep pills kept getting away with it because the legal system is so slow. The idea that market competition would solve these problems, and now with the internet giving people good consumer advice, just doesn't reach the media. So, as I said, I stopped winning those awards, and I wrote this book about my experience, and it became a bestseller. I thought, if I just explain this to people, I'm a free market zealot now, a born-again free marketer. It just makes so much sense. It brings so much good that people would get it. And despite, obviously, despite the book selling well and all that, people don't get it. My own wife of 40 years still doesn't get it. She kind of does, and then when the New York Times comes out with its next idiot story, she says, but what about this? It's not, you're weird, you're abnormal people. It's not intuitive to people the way it is to you. But I decided I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life now to trying to convince the recalcitrant that this is a better way to go. And that's why I'm doing Stossell TV. I left Fox to do more of these stories. But how do we explain freedom? I mean, Adam Smith got it right with the invisible hand. But look at him. He looks like a fat cat. That's not going to convince people. And the invisible hand is invisible. I mean, we try to find ways to make it accessible to people. Hayek's spontaneous order is probably a more useful way to convey it. And to try to do that, we rented a skating rink and got a former Olympic champion to direct people with a megaphone at the skating rink. And that, of course, caused people to fall down and helps make the point that we all the time work these things out on our own. Still, people say, all right, you know, for simple stuff like that, movies, music, capitalism works, but when it comes to our safety, you have to have government. And that's why in America we have OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and President Clinton was fond of showing this slide when he made speeches. And it's true. Workplace fatalities and injuries in step dropped ever since OSHA was created. And it makes you say, yeah, because of their rule book. And they tell the greedy capitalists who couldn't care if their workers get hurt, they set minimum requirements to keep them safe. It's just a priori true. Until you do, as one researcher did, go back and look at what happened before OSHA began. I mean, government's like someone who jumps in front of a parade and says, I led the parade, I made it happen. But the truth is, in a free society, things get better through competition, through free markets. If it's a free society, you're wealthier. Wealthier is healthier. When you have money, you care more about your safety. We also learn through an open society. When there's an accident, people make adjustments to keep it from happening again. Even the greediest factory owner cares because of the market. It costs him more money to replace the workers he kills. Capitalism works. Government fails in so many ways. Just one more example here. Look at the war on poverty. When I was a student, it's the beginning of the war on poverty. It just made so much sense. This is this rich country. It's a disgrace that some people are poor, but we're wise. We can set up programs. We can fix this. And they set up welfare. And you look at the numbers, the poverty line dropped for the first 7 years when welfare began. And it should have. They were giving people money. But of course, they kept going. We've spent $71 trillion on it so far. But what's the long-term result? Progress stopped after those 7 years. We taught people, we encouraged people to be dependent. We created something never seen before, a permanent underclass of fatherless children because you lost money if you were married. You didn't get the welfare check. And even more horrifying is if you look at before the war on poverty began, Americans were lifting ourselves out of poverty on our own. Government continued the progress for 7 years and then stopped it. It's what government does again and again, and government grows. This is a graph of the size of the state since the beginning of the Republic. The first blip is World War I, then World War II, the bigger one, and spending used to go down after wars. But after that, it's only gone up, and I haven't updated this chart. It's gone up even more. It's unsustainable. We have to deal with this. We have to explain to people what works and that this doesn't work. And it ought to be easy because you can see what works. Our ideas work. Look at, as Milton Friedman used to cite, Hong Kong. This little island with no natural resources, it's just a rock. It went from third world to first world in 50 years. We know what creates prosperity. Why doesn't everybody do it? What happened in Hong Kong? Well, they had economic freedom, the main ingredient that lets people make themselves prosperous. It's actually not just economic freedom. You need rule of law. You need to know that if you build a factory, the dictator isn't going to take it from you or somebody isn't going to steal all your product. So those two things. And they had this in Hong Kong. British rulers prevented people from killing each other, stealing each other's stuff. And then they did something wonderful. They sat around and drank tea. They left free people alone to pursue their own interests, and Hong Kong prospered. I mean, we know what works. It's easy to start a business, or it was in Hong Kong. I started one in a day. It just took a 1-hour trip to get a permit. My business was a stupid business selling ABC yo-yos and frisbees that nobody bought, but that ability to try something is what made prosperity possible. Now, for this hour, ABC sent me around the world. They were spending big in those days, and we stopped in India, where if you want to start a business, you have to get permission from these people. And it could take years, and good ideas died on those shelves in the background. I mean, why is India poor? People from India get rich when they come to free countries. India is poor, I would argue, just because of intuitive regulation. There ought to be a law. The stuff that my wife and most Americans still believe. We have the answer. We ought to follow it. I mean, China has killed Hong Kong, sadly. Democrats want more regulation. They argue that, look, we're not taking care of the poor. Income disparity, the poor are so poor and they're suffering, and yet they ignore the benefits of free markets. And think about it. The kings and queens of Versailles didn't have the lives that the average American poor person has now. We have air conditioning, flush toilets, fresh fruit in the winter, music and theater on demand, pain relief, cars, airplanes, electric life, better lives than the kings had. Because of capitalism, which is now vilified in most American media. I mean, think of the supermarket. It's a miracle. I mean, a zillion products, wide aisles. It's open 24/7. Prices are cheap. They rarely poison you. But we don't thank capitalism when we go to the supermarket. We don't think about it that when you could take a piece of plastic and give it to a stranger in a foreign country who doesn't even speak English, and he'll rent you a car for a week. And when you get home, Visa or MasterCard will have the accounting correct to the penny. You'll scream if they don't. And yet government can't even count the votes accurately. But people want more government. Government fails, individuals succeed. I want to retire. I'm 1,000 years old. I need one of you to replace me. So please, we have to explain the beauty of this. Please come, apply to replace me, and thank you very much, Students for Liberty.